The first time my neighbor told me he loved me, he was lying in a hospital bed with a bandage wrapped around his head. The worst part? He looked completely convinced. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process what I just heard. The doctor standing beside me didn't laugh. Oliver reached for my hand again. "There you are," he whispered with a tired smile. "I knew you'd come." His fingers wrapped around mine before I had the chance to pull away. Everything in the room suddenly felt very quiet. The doctor glanced between us. "So, you are Nathan?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Oliver squeezed my hand. "I've been asking for him." My stomach tightened. There had to be some mistake, a big one. Because Oliver and I definitely weren't dating. Honestly, we barely knew each other. I had lived next door to Oliver for almost 2 years. We shared one of those duplex houses where you could hear your neighbors sneeze if the windows were open. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies either. We just existed next to each other. He was the kind of guy everyone in the neighborhood liked. 28, tall, dark blonde hair that never seemed to stay in place, always jogging in the mornings, always carrying grocery bags for elderly neighbors without being asked, always fixing things. If someone's fence broke, Oliver showed up. If Mrs. Dawson's car wouldn't start, Oliver was already under the hood. If a package got delivered to the wrong porch, Oliver walked it over with a smile. Meanwhile, I worked from home as a freelance illustrator. Most days I barely left my house. I wasn't antisocial, just comfortable being alone. Still, Oliver somehow managed to drag me into conversations every few days. "Morning, Nathan." "Morning. Working today?" "When am I not?" He'd grin. "You need a hobby." "I have hobbies." "Sleeping doesn't count." I'd roll my eyes. "It absolutely counts." He'd laugh every single time. The weird thing was, he remembered everything, not important things, tiny things. He remembered that I hated mushrooms. He remembered my coffee order after hearing it once. He remembered my birthday because he'd seen a package on my porch with balloons printed on the box. "Happy birthday," he'd called across the driveway that morning. I actually stopped walking. "You remembered?" He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "You remembered mine. I saw your mailbox full of birthday cards. Still counts." That was Oliver. He noticed people. About 6 months before the accident, my kitchen sink exploded. Not literally, but it felt close. I was washing dishes when a pipe burst underneath. Water sprayed everywhere. Within seconds, my floor looked like a swimming pool. I panicked. Then someone knocked. "Nathan." It was Oliver. "I saw water running under your back door. I opened it." "My sink." "I figured." He walked in before I could finish. Within 5 minutes, he had the water shut off. Within 30 minutes, he'd replaced the broken connector. I tried paying him. He refused. "Then let me at least buy dinner." "You don't cook." "Rude." "It's true." So we ordered pizza instead. That was probably the longest we'd ever talked. Turns out Oliver had worked construction before switching to project management. He liked hiking, loved old horror movies, played terrible guitar, thought pineapple on pizza should be illegal. I've never met someone so passionate about fruit. It's about principles. It's about pizza. We argued for 20 minutes. He somehow won, even though he was objectively wrong. After that, things changed a little, not dramatically. We'd wave more often, sometimes grab coffee, sometimes end up talking outside while collecting the mail. Nothing unusual, nothing romantic, just neighbors who slowly became comfortable. Then came the accident. It happened on a rainy Thursday. I wasn't there. Apparently, Oliver had been driving home from work when another driver ran a red light. His truck rolled into a ditch. He survived, broken collarbone, several cracked ribs, a concussion. The head injury was what worried everyone. I only found out because his sister knocked on my door that evening. You know Nathan? Yeah, I'm Emily, Oliver's sister. She looked exhausted. He keeps asking for you. I frowned. For me? She nodded. He won't stop. I figured maybe he was confused. Maybe he wanted someone to feed his dog, water his plants, something practical. So I drove to the hospital. I expected to stay 5 minutes. Instead, I walked into his room just as he opened his eyes. The second he saw me, his entire face lit up. There he is. His voice sounded weak, but happy, really happy. I smiled awkwardly. Hey, Oliver. You cut your hair. I blinked. I did. It looks good. Thanks. He reached toward me. Come here. I hesitated. The nurse gave me an encouraging nod. So I stepped closer. Oliver took my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was worried. Worried about what? You, I frowned. I'm fine. He smiled softly. I know. Silence settled over the room. Then he looked at the nurse. Can we have a minute? She nodded and quietly left. I was about to ask how he felt. Instead, Oliver looked at me with complete sincerity. I love you. Every thought in my head disappeared. What? I know we've been fighting lately. What? I'm sorry. He looked genuinely heartbroken. I shouldn't have left angry. My pulse started climbing. Oliver, I don't even remember what we argued about. He laughed weakly. Isn't that stupid? I stared at him. He stared back, waiting, like he expected me to answer, like we'd had this conversation 100 times before. Then the doctor walked in carrying a tablet. He looked from Oliver to me, then quietly asked, Mr. Carter, would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I followed him into the hallway. He closed the door behind us, then lowered his voice. I'm afraid your neighbor has significant retrograde memory loss. I swallowed. What does that mean? He remembers many older memories. The doctor paused, but his brain has filled in several missing years incorrectly. I felt my stomach drop. What exactly does he think? The doctor looked at his notes, then back at me. He is absolutely convinced that the two of you have been in a committed relationship for nearly 3 years. I honestly thought the doctor was joking, not because memory loss itself sounded impossible. I knew head injuries could do strange things. But this was absurd. I think there must be some mistake, I said quietly. The doctor folded his arms. I wish there were. We're neighbors. I understand. We've never dated. I understand that too. I rubbed my forehead. So why does he think we have? Traumatic brain injuries don't always erase memories cleanly. Sometimes the brain tries to repair missing pieces by connecting unrelated memories, emotions, routines, and familiar faces. I stared at the floor. So, he made it up? Not intentionally. The doctor sighed. To him, those memories feel completely real. My stomach twisted. Should I tell him? The doctor's expression became careful. Not immediately. What? If we aggressively challenge false memories this early, it can increase confusion and anxiety. So I'm supposed to pretend? I'm asking you not to confront him while we evaluate how extensive the memory loss is. That wasn't the answer I wanted, at all. How long? We don't know. Days, weeks, months. Every possibility sounded worse than the last. Oliver's sister found me sitting in the waiting room 20 minutes later. She handed me a cup of terrible vending machine coffee. You look like you need this. I do. She sat beside me. The doctor told you? I nodded. Emily closed her eyes. He thinks you're his boyfriend. Apparently. She let out a tired laugh. I almost corrected him. But he looked so happy. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she smiled weakly. You know. What? He talked about you a lot. I looked at her. He did? She nodded. Not constantly, but enough that I knew your name before we met. That surprised me. What did he say? Emily shrugged. Mostly little things. Like, Nathan finally bought a real coffee maker. Nathan's cat hates everyone except me. Nathan works too much. Nathan forgets to eat when he's drawing. I blinked. He noticed all that? She laughed. Oliver notices everything. Apparently he did, because I couldn't remember ever telling him half those things. The next morning, I tried going back to work. I lasted exactly 43 minutes. Every sketch looked terrible. Every email annoyed me. Finally, I gave up. At noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Nathan? It was Oliver. His voice sounded stronger. Hey, I miss you. I closed my eyes. Already? You just saw me yesterday. I know. But hospitals aren't fun. I couldn't argue with that. How are you feeling? My ribs hate me. I imagine. But the nurses are nice. A pause. Are you coming today? I looked at the clock. Yeah. His smile was obvious through the phone. I knew you would. By the time I arrived, Oliver was sitting up in bed. He looked considerably better, still pale, still bruised, but awake. The second he saw me, he smiled. There you are. I pulled a chair closer. How's the celebrity life? Boring. I figured. He looked at me for a second, then frowned. Why are you sitting so far away? What? You always steal my chair. I do? He laughed. You complain about my hospital food while eating half of it. I've literally never done that. He tilted his head. You're joking. I wasn't. His smile slowly faded. You don't remember? The question hit harder than I expected. I forced a small smile. Concussion jokes aren't fair. He studied me for another moment, then slowly nodded. Right. The relief on his face told me he'd accepted that explanation, which somehow made me feel worse. Over the next hour, we talked, or rather, he talked, about vacations we'd supposedly taken, a camping trip, a terrible beach motel, some disastrous attempt at kayaking where I'd apparently fallen into a lake. Every story included me. Every story felt vivid, detailed, specific. Then you blamed the kayak. It looked unstable. You said it was possessed. I stand by that. He laughed so hard he immediately grabbed his ribs. Ow. Don't laugh. You're funny. I wasn't. I was terrified because none of it had happened. Yet he remembered every detail, every conversation, every joke, like he'd lived another life. A nurse interrupted us that afternoon. Time for your memory assessment. Oliver groaned dramatically. I hate these. The nurse smiled. It'll only take 15 minutes. She looked at me. You can wait outside. I nodded. No problem. As I stood, Oliver reached for my wrist. You'll still be here? His voice had become unexpectedly quiet, almost nervous. I don't want to wake up alone again. Something tightened in my chest. I'll be here. He smiled immediately. Promise? Promise. Only after the door closed behind me did I realize I'd answered without thinking. The neurologist found me in the hallway an hour later. We've completed the preliminary testing. And his long-term memory is fragmented, meaning he accurately remembers childhood. College is inconsistent. The last 3 years are severely distorted. I leaned against the wall. So, everything recent. Yes. And me? He glanced at his notes. You appear in almost every reconstructed memory. I frowned. Why? We don't know. But emotionally significant people are often easier for the brain to retain. Emotionally significant. The words echoed in my head, but we weren't close. The neurologist gave me a sympathetic look. Were you certain about that? I opened my mouth, then stopped. Were we? Sure, we weren't best friends. But Oliver had fixed my sink, walked my cat to the emergency vet when I had the flu, picked up my groceries during a snowstorm, helped me move furniture, remembered my birthday, brought me soup once when I was sick. I hadn't asked him to. He'd just noticed my porch hadn't been used in 2 days. Maybe, maybe we'd been closer than I'd realized. Not dating, definitely not dating, but closer. 3 days later, Oliver was discharged. His sister drove him home. I watched from my front window as he slowly climbed out of the car, one arm in a sling, bruises still visible. He looked exhausted. Then he saw me. His face lit up instantly. There you are. Before I could react, he carefully crossed the driveway. Emily mouthed good luck behind him. You're supposed to be resting, I said. I wanted to see you. He stopped in front of me, then frowned. Why are you standing on your porch? Because it's my porch, he smiled. No, he pointed toward his house. Our porch. I felt my heart sink. He honestly believed it, completely. Then, with absolute confidence, Oliver reached into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and held one out to me. I almost forgot. I stared at the key. What is this? He looked confused. Our house key. I looked across the driveway, then back at him. Oliver smiled. Come on. He gently took my hand. Let's go home. I didn't take the key. I couldn't. Oliver kept holding it out with that patient little smile, like he honestly thought I was teasing him. You're waiting for me to put it in your hand, he said. I'm not. You always do this. I really don't. He laughed quietly. You've been impossible since we painted the kitchen. I stared at him. We painted the kitchen? You picked that awful green. I hate green. You said it looked sophisticated. I have never used the word sophisticated to describe a color. He frowned. Really? Really? For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then it disappeared. You must still be stressed. He slipped the key back into his pocket. It's okay. We'll figure it out. We? That word was starting to hurt. Emily walked over after Oliver went inside. He doing okay? She asked. I think so. You look like you're the one recovering. I laughed without meaning to. Feels that way. She leaned against her car. I'm sorry. For what? For putting you in this position. You didn't. No, but he's convinced you're the safest person in his life. I looked toward Oliver's front window. He was standing inside smiling at me through the curtains. Like he was waiting for me to come over. Emily noticed. He keeps doing that. What? Watching for you. The next week became strange. Every morning around 9, Oliver knocked on my door. Every single morning. Nathan, I'd open it. Morning. I made breakfast. You don't have to. I know. He'd hold up a container anyway. I made too much. The first day it was pancakes. The second day it was scrambled eggs. The third day, burnt French toast. I got distracted. I can tell. You still love it. I do? You always eat the burnt pieces. I looked at the charcoal-colored toast. I question your memory. He grinned. So do the doctors. Despite everything, I accepted the food, mostly because arguing with him seemed pointless, partly because it actually tasted good. Well, the eggs did. A week after Oliver came home, I accompanied him to a follow-up appointment, mostly because Emily had to work. The neurologist greeted us warmly. How have things been? My boyfriend keeps acting weird, Oliver answered immediately. I nearly choked on the water I was drinking. The doctor didn't even react. And what do you mean by weird? Oliver pointed at me. He keeps pretending we aren't together. I stared very hard at the floor. The doctor made a few notes. How does that make you feel? Scared. Oliver's answer came instantly. I looked up. His smile had disappeared. What if he doesn't love me anymore? The room became painfully quiet. The doctor asked a few more questions before sending Oliver down the hall for additional testing. The moment the door closed, he looked at me. He's becoming emotionally dependent on the memories. Can they be fixed? We hope. Hope? He sighed. Recovery from brain trauma isn't predictable. So what am I supposed to do? Be kind. I am. I know. He paused. But don't encourage the false memories. I haven't. And don't suddenly disappear. That one surprised me. Why? Because from his perspective, the doctor folded his hands. The love of his life is already pulling away. That sentence stayed with me for days, not because it was true, it wasn't, but because it was true for Oliver. His fear wasn't fake, his sadness wasn't fake, only the memories were. That Friday evening, there was another knock on my door. Oliver stood outside holding a cardboard box. I found something. What is it? Our pictures. My stomach tightened. Pictures? He carried the box inside without waiting for an invitation. We sat on my couch while he opened it. Inside were dozens of old photo albums, neighborhood events, barbecues, Christmas decorations, community cleanup days. Oliver smiled as he flipped through them. There, he pointed, a picture of us standing beside each other during a neighborhood barbecue. I remembered it. Someone had asked everyone to squeeze together for a group photo. Oliver tapped the picture. Our first summer together. It was a barbecue. You spilled lemonade on me. I actually did. You apologized for 20 minutes. I had. He laughed. You were adorable. I looked closer. There wasn't anything romantic about the picture, just two neighbors smiling at the camera. He kept turning pages. Another picture, the neighborhood Halloween party, another, a charity run, another, Christmas lights. Every photo happened to include both of us, mostly because our neighborhood was small. But to Oliver, each one was proof. Look, he held up another picture. We're holding hands. I leaned closer. We weren't. I had slipped on ice. Oliver had grabbed my wrist to stop me from falling. Someone snapped the picture at exactly that moment. He smiled. I remember this. I swallowed. I almost fell. You did. You caught me. I always catch you. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't trying to convince me. He genuinely remembered that day differently. To him, that photograph captured something completely different. Later that night, I walked him home. Halfway across the driveway, he stopped. Nathan? Yeah? Can I ask you something? Sure. He looked nervous. Did I do something before the accident? What do you mean? You've been. He searched for the right word. Careful. I didn't answer. You smile differently now. I felt my stomach drop. You keep looking at me like you're trying not to hurt me. The words hit far harder than they should have. I don't know what's happening, he whispered. I remember loving you. I remember building a life with you. I remember waking up beside you. His voice cracked. But every time I look at you now, it's like I'm the only one who remembers any of it. I couldn't breathe. He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't angry. He just looked lost, completely lost. Before I could think of anything to say, he quietly asked, if I wasn't in this accident, would you still be looking at me like a stranger? I didn't answer him, not because I wanted to avoid the question, because I honestly didn't know how. Oliver stood in the middle of the driveway, waiting. Street lights cast long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment the neighborhood was completely silent. Finally, I said the only thing that felt honest. I don't think you're a stranger. He searched my face, but I let out a slow breath. I think we're trying to understand two completely different versions of the same life. His shoulders relaxed just a little. I guess that's fair. He smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Good night, Nathan. Good night. I watched him walk inside before going back to my own house. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, I found a sticky note on my front door. Made coffee. Doors open. Oh, I couldn't help smiling. Then I caught myself. This was getting dangerous. Not because Oliver was doing anything wrong, because I was starting to enjoy the routine. His house smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon. He looked up from the kitchen when I walked in. There you are. You knew I'd come. You always come after coffee. I do? You complain about me waking you up. I believe that part. He laughed. Sit. I sat. He placed a mug in front of me without asking, exactly the way I drank it. One sugar, a little milk. I stared at it. How did you know? He looked confused. I've made your coffee for years. Of course. Another memory. Except I took a sip. It was perfect. Exactly how I liked it. You've been paying attention, I said quietly. Oliver shrugged. I pay attention to you. The words landed somewhere deep inside me. He didn't even realize how honest they were. As we ate breakfast, someone knocked on the front door. Oliver stood. I'll get it. A minute later, he came back with an older woman carrying a pie. Mrs. Dawson, our 80-year-old neighbor. Oh, good, she said, smiling warmly. Both of you are home. I stood to greet her. She handed Oliver the pie. For taking me to the pharmacy yesterday. It wasn't a problem. Then she looked at me. And thank you for always keeping him company. I blinked. What do you mean? Mrs. Dawson frowned. You've practically lived over here since he moved in. Oliver smiled. I told you. I looked back at Mrs. Dawson. I haven't. She interrupted me. Oh, maybe not literally. She chuckled. But every evening I'd see one of you walking across the driveway. That stopped me. Every evening, she continued, sometimes you'd sit on the porch talking until midnight. I'd wave from my window. You boys never noticed. Oliver grinned. Nathan gets lost in conversations. I couldn't remember. Then again, I usually worked late. Maybe I had wandered outside more than I realized. Mrs. Dawson wasn't finished. You know what I always liked? What? You two never needed entertainment. No television. No loud parties. You'd just sit there with coffee. Talking, she smiled fondly. Young people don't do that anymore. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Oliver looked at me. What? I forgot about the porch. He smiled. I didn't. That afternoon, I found myself walking into my own backyard. The fence between our properties had a gate. I almost never used it. Almost. The latch squeaked. That sound felt familiar. I frowned. Had it always sounded like that? As I stepped through, I noticed something I'd somehow ignored for 2 years. There were two chairs on Oliver's back porch. Not one, two, both worn in exactly the same way. A small table sat between them. On it rested a deck of cards, a chessboard, and two chipped coffee mugs, one blue, one black. Oliver walked outside carrying laundry. He smiled when he saw me. I was wondering when you'd remember. I didn't remember. You came through the gate. I looked back. The path between our houses had patches where the grass was worn flat from frequent walking. My chest tightened. We really had spent a lot of time together, not dating, but closer than I'd admitted. You never locked the gate, I said. You hate walking around the front. I blinked. I do hate that. I know. He tossed a towel over the clothesline. You've been using that shortcut forever. I hadn't even realized it. A few days later, Emily invited both of us to dinner. I need a break from hospital food stories, she joked. We ordered takeout and spent the evening talking, mostly laughing. For the first time since the accident, things almost felt normal. Then Emily disappeared into the kitchen. Oliver leaned closer. You laughed. What? You haven't laughed like that since I woke up. I guess I haven't. I missed it. I looked away. He noticed. Nathan, what? I'm scared to go to sleep, I frowned. Why? Because every morning I wake up hoping you'll remember. His voice was barely above a whisper, and every morning you still don't. Before I could answer, Emily returned with dessert. The conversation shifted, but those words stayed with me. That night I couldn't stop thinking, so I did something I hadn't done before. I opened my phone and searched our messages. There weren't hundreds, but there were far more than I'd expected. Pictures of neighborhood dogs, memes, recommendations for movies, photos of failed cooking experiments, random messages. Oliver, need anything from the store? Me, coffee. Oliver, already guessed that. Another. Oliver, storm coming, bring your plants inside. Another. Me, can you help me move a bookshelf? Oliver, already walking over. Then I noticed something strange. Almost every conversation had been started by Oliver. I kept scrolling backward, months, then a year, then almost two. He had always been the first to reach out, always. My stomach twisted. Had I really been that passive? Or had I simply taken his presence for granted? I locked my phone and stared at the ceiling. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe Oliver hadn't invented everything. Maybe his brain had only changed one thing. Maybe we had never been boyfriends. But maybe he had been quietly falling in love with me long before the accident, and maybe I had been too blind to see it. That realization followed me everywhere. Not because I suddenly believed Oliver's version of reality, I didn't. But for the first time since the accident, I stopped asking myself why his brain had chosen me. Instead, I started wondering whether I'd missed something that had been right in front of me all along. 3 days later, I was halfway through answering emails when someone knocked on my door. Oliver stood outside holding a leash. My cat Milo was happily rubbing against his legs. I blinked. Why do you have my cat? Oliver looked just as confused. He was in my house. What? He came through the back gate. I looked down at Milo. The traitor purred loudly. I didn't even know he could open the screen door. He does. Oliver scratched behind Milo's ears. He usually comes over around lunchtime. I stared. Usually? Oliver nodded like it was obvious. He sleeps on my couch. No, he doesn't, Oliver smiled. Come see. Curiosity got the better of me. A minute later, we were standing in Oliver's living room. Sure enough, there was a folded gray blanket on one corner of his couch, covered in orange cat hair. Milo jumped onto it without hesitation, curled into a ball, and immediately closed his eyes. Oliver folded his arms. Told you, I couldn't stop laughing. He's cheating on me. He likes my heated blanket. I bought him a heated bed. He prefers mine. I've been replaced. Oliver grinned. You have competition. For a few minutes, everything felt easy, natural. Then I noticed something sitting on the bookshelf, a framed photograph. It was from last winter. Oliver and I were standing in front of the neighborhood Christmas tree, bundled in coats. He was laughing. I was looking at him instead of the camera. I frowned. I don't remember this. You hated the cold. I still do. You kept saying we'd leave after 5 minutes. What happened? You stayed almost 2 hours. I looked at the picture again. It wasn't romantic, but I'd never realized how often photographers had caught us looking at each other instead of the camera. That weekend, Emily invited me out for coffee. I need to ask you something. She looked unusually serious. What is it? She stirred her drink for several seconds before speaking. Did Oliver ever ask you out? I nearly dropped my mug. No. You sure? I'm pretty sure I'd remember that. She nodded slowly. I figured. Why? Emily sighed. Because I think he wanted to. My heartbeat sped up. When? For months. I stared at her. He never said anything to me. He wouldn't. Why not? She smiled sadly. Because he was terrified. Terrified of what? Ruining what you already had. I didn't know what to say. Emily continued. You know how he talked about you? I know he mentioned me. No, she shook her head. I mean, really talked about you. I stayed quiet. He'd tell me about your drawings, the movies you'd recommend, the stupid arguments you two had about pizza. She laughed softly. I honestly thought you were already together. I wasn't. I know that now. She looked out the cafe window. The week before the accident, she hesitated. He asked me if he should tell you how he felt. Everything inside me went still. What did you tell him? I asked him one question. What? Does Nathan give you a reason to believe he feels the same way? And? Emily smiled sadly. He got quiet. I swallowed. Then he said, she paused. No. The drive home felt much longer than usual. Every conversation I'd ever had with Oliver replayed itself in my head. Every coffee, every movie night, every random text, every time he'd offered to help before I even asked. Had all of that meant something more to him? And if it had, how had I never noticed? The following Monday, Oliver had another memory evaluation. This time, the neurologist asked to speak with both of us afterward. The good news, he said, is that his cognitive function is improving. Oliver smiled. I told you. The concerning part, the doctor continued, is that the false relationship memories remain extremely consistent. I looked at him. So they are not fading? No, he turned to Oliver. Can I ask you something? Oliver nodded. What is your happiest memory with Nathan? Oliver didn't even hesitate. The cabin, I frowned. What cabin? He smiled. We rented a little place by a lake. You burnt breakfast. I proposed we never cook again. I looked at the doctor. We never went to a cabin. The doctor nodded. I know. Then he turned back to Oliver. What happened after breakfast? Oliver's expression softened. We walked around the lake. It started raining. Nathan complained the whole time. I gave him my jacket. He smiled to himself. Then he kissed me. Silence. The doctor wrote something down. What made that memory special? Oliver looked genuinely surprised by the question, because he laughed quietly. It was the first time I believed someone could actually choose me. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. There wasn't a trace of doubt in his voice, no hesitation. To him, that memory wasn't fake. It was one of the happiest days of his life. That evening, we sat on the back porch together. Neither of us said much. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky orange. Oliver broke the silence first. Can I ask you something? Sure. If I remembered everything tomorrow, he looked straight ahead instead of at me, would you still spend time with me? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, he smiled weakly. What if I woke up and realized we'd never dated? He finally looked at me. Would we still be friends? I answered without thinking. Of course. He studied my face for several long seconds. Then he nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. I frowned. Why? He looked down at his hands. Because lately, he let out a slow breath. I've started wondering if maybe my heart remembers something, even if my memories don't. The words hung between us. For the first time since the accident, Oliver himself was beginning to question the life he remembered. But there was one thing he still couldn't let go of, the feeling that, somehow, he had loved me long before he ever lost his memory. Oliver's question stayed with me for days. What if I woke up and realized we'd never dated? Would we still be friends? I'd answered immediately, of course. But the truth was, that wasn't the question bothering me anymore. The question bothering me was one I wasn't ready to admit. If Oliver had confessed before the accident, what would I have said? A few days later, I was working in my office when my phone buzzed. Oliver, can you come over? I replied almost instantly. Everything okay? His answer came after nearly a minute. I found something. By the time I walked across the backyard, he was sitting at his dining table with a cardboard storage box. I've been cleaning the guest room. He looked unusually nervous. This was in the closet. Inside were old notebooks, receipts, instruction manuals, a stack of birthday cards. Nothing remarkable. Then he pulled out a sealed envelope. It simply said, Nathan in Oliver's handwriting. I don't remember writing it, he said quietly, but I figured you should open it. I hesitated. You've never seen it? He shook his head. No. The envelope wasn't sealed anymore. It looked like it had been opened once, then tucked away. I unfolded the single sheet inside. It wasn't a love letter, not exactly. It read, Nathan, I'm writing this because I know I'll probably never say any of it out loud. You've become my favorite part of almost every day. I keep telling myself that's enough. We have coffee. We watch terrible movies. We complain about work. We argue about whose turn it is to shovel snow. Maybe that's all this is supposed to be. But every time you smile at me across the driveway, I want something I promised myself I wouldn't want. I want to know what it feels like if you ever looked at me the way I look at you. I don't think you do, and that's okay. I'd rather stay your friend forever than lose you because I was selfish. So you'll probably never read this. Oliver. I read it twice, then a third time. My throat felt painfully tight. Oliver watched my face. Bad news? I slowly folded the letter. It wasn't meant to be read. I figured. He waited. What did it say? I looked at him. I don't think you're ready. He accepted that answer surprisingly easily. If it's about us, he smiled faintly. I'm starting to think I already know. That night I couldn't stop thinking about the sentence that hit me the hardest. I'd rather stay your friend forever than lose you. How many opportunities had I missed? Not because Oliver had hidden his feelings, because I'd never stopped to ask why someone would choose to spend so much of his life with me. The next afternoon, Mrs. Dawson knocked on my door again. I need a favor. 20 minutes later, Oliver and I were carrying a heavy bookcase into her living room. Halfway through, Mrs. Dawson laughed. You two work together better than anybody I've ever seen. Oliver smiled. We've had practice, I laughed. Apparently. Mrs. Dawson looked between us. You know, she pointed toward the bookshelf. This isn't the first piece of furniture you've carried together. I frowned. It isn't? Oh goodness, she chuckled. When Nathan bought that giant sofa 2 summers ago, the delivery company left it outside. She looked at Oliver. You helped him wrestle it through the front door. Oliver nodded immediately. You bought us pizza afterward. I blinked. I did. You insisted paying me in pizza was fair. I remember that. I actually did, just a little. We'd ended up sitting on the floor because I hadn't assembled the couch yet. The pizza box had been balanced on moving boxes. We'd laughed because neither of us had any plates unpacked. The memory surfaced so suddenly that I smiled without realizing it. Oliver noticed. There it is. What? You remembered. A little. His grin was brighter than I'd seen in weeks. You smiled exactly the same way. Later that evening, we sat on his porch, the same 2 chairs, the same little table, only this time, the silence didn't feel awkward, it felt familiar. I've been thinking, Oliver said. Dangerous. I know, he laughed. Then his expression softened. I think I owe you an apology. For what? If we were never together, he rubbed the back of his neck, then I've been putting a lot on you. I looked at him. You didn't ask for any of this. I know. But neither did you. I stayed quiet. I keep expecting you to remember a life that didn't happen. He swallowed. That can't be fair. For the first time since the accident, he sounded like the old Oliver everyone had described: steady, thoughtful, kind. I don't want you to feel trapped. You don't, he smiled. I think I did. The following week brought another small surprise. The doctors approved Oliver to start driving short distances again. He was thrilled. I finally have my freedom back. Emily rolled her eyes. You've been medically cleared to buy groceries, not drive across the country. He laughed. His recovery was obvious now. He walked without wincing. His headaches were less frequent. He remembered new information perfectly. Only the missing years remained tangled. The false relationship still existed, but it no longer seemed quite as solid. Sometimes he'd pause in the middle of a story. Actually, he'd frown. I'm not sure if that happened. The doctors called it progress. Oliver called it frustrating. I secretly called it hopeful. One Saturday afternoon, he asked if I wanted to visit the neighborhood farmers market. It had become an annual tradition, apparently. I don't remember ever going. You complained every year. I believe that. You always said tomatoes shouldn't cost that much. They shouldn't, he laughed. Halfway through the market, an elderly vendor smiled when she saw us. You're back, Oliver waved. Good to see you. She handed me a sample of homemade jam. I saved your favorite. I blinked. My favorite? You buy 2 jars every summer. I looked at Oliver. You knew that. You give one to Mrs. Dawson every Christmas. I stared at him. I do? You've done it since the year she broke her wrist. A memory flickered. Mrs. Dawson mentioning she couldn't make breakfast because opening jars hurt. I'd bought extra jam without thinking much about it. I'd forgotten completely. Oliver hadn't. He remembered dozens of little moments I'd left behind. Not because we had been dating, because he'd been paying attention all along. As we walked home carrying bags of vegetables, I realized something that made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. Oliver turned. What? I smiled. For 2 years. I thought you were just the nice neighbor. And I laughed quietly. You were actually my best friend. Oliver stared at me. His eyes became suspiciously shiny. I was wondering when you'd figure that out. After that day at the farmer's market, something changed between us. Not all at once, not dramatically. There wasn't a movie moment where we looked into each other's eyes and suddenly understood everything. It was quieter than that. I stopped thinking about what Oliver remembered and started paying attention to who he was now. A week later, Emily invited us over for dinner again. The moment we walked through her front door, she froze. What? She looked from me to Oliver. You came in the same car. Oliver shrugged. We always take one car. I laughed. Actually, he offered me a ride. Emily raised an eyebrow. And you accepted? Why is that surprising? She smiled to herself. Because before the accident, Nathan refused rides from anyone. I frowned. I did. You always said you liked driving yourself. Oliver looked at me. You really did. Huh. Emily set plates on the table. She tried to sound casual. How are things? Oliver answered first. Better. Then he looked at me. We're figuring things out. I nodded. Yeah. It was the simplest answer we could have given, and somehow the truest. 2 days later, I came home to find Oliver sitting on my front steps. He looked embarrassed. I locked myself out. You have your phone? He held it up. My keys are inside. I unlocked my front door. You can wait here. Thanks. An hour passed, then another. The locksmith kept getting delayed. We ended up eating frozen pizza in my kitchen. Oliver laughed after his first bite. This is terrible. You've had 3 slices. I never said I'd stop eating it. We moved into the living room. A movie played in the background. Neither of us paid much attention. At one point, Milo jumped onto Oliver's lap. Without thinking, Oliver scratched behind his ears. Without thinking, I leaned against the other end of the couch, comfortable, relaxed. It hit me then. This didn't feel new, it felt like something we'd been doing forever, just not in the way Oliver remembered. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. It was the neurologist. I'd like both of you to come in this afternoon. My stomach tightened. Is something wrong? No. His voice sounded encouraging. I think we've reached an important stage. Oliver looked just as nervous as I felt while we sat across from the doctor. He closed the folder in front of him. I've reviewed all of your recent evaluations. He looked at Oliver. Your recovery has exceeded our expectations. Oliver smiled. So I'm done? Not quite. The doctor leaned forward. I want to ask you one final question. Oliver nodded. When you think about Nathan, what's the first thing you feel? Oliver answered almost immediately. Safe. The doctor smiled. And the first memory? Oliver closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he frowned. It. He opened them again. It's blurry. What do you mean? I know there was a cabin, but I can't see it anymore. He looked confused. The lake's gone. The house is gone. The kiss. He swallowed. I don't know if it happened. The room stayed quiet. The doctor nodded slowly. That's progress. Oliver looked down at his hands. So, I made it up. Not consciously. The doctor spoke gently. Your brain created a story to explain feelings that were already there. Oliver stared at him. What feelings? The doctor smiled kindly. The ones that survived even after the memories didn't. Oliver didn't say another word for the rest of the appointment. We walked home in silence. Halfway across the park, Oliver finally spoke. I owe you another apology. You don't. I do. He stopped walking. I kept asking you to love someone who never existed. I shook my head. That's not true. He looked confused. The person existed. The relationship didn't. He looked away. I don't even know how to separate them anymore. I understood, better than he realized, because neither could I. That evening I couldn't stop thinking about the letter, the one Oliver had written before the accident. He had loved me, really loved me, not because of false memories, not because of a brain injury, because of who I actually was. And I had almost let that disappear without ever noticing. I walked across the backyard just before sunset. The gate squeaked. Oliver looked up from the porch. Hey, hey, you okay? I nodded. I found something. He laughed. Please tell me it isn't another mysterious letter. It isn't. I held up my phone. My calendar. He looked confused. What about it? I went back through the last 2 years. And? I smiled. I thought we only saw each other once in a while. Oliver waited. We had dinner together 38 times. His eyebrows lifted. We watched 21 movies. We shoveled snow at each other's houses. We spent almost every Sunday afternoon doing, honestly, nothing. He laughed softly. I told you. No, I shook my head. You tried to tell me. I sat down in the chair beside him. I just never realized. The evening breeze rustled the trees behind us. I've been remembering little things, I admitted, not because I lost my memory, because I never paid enough attention in the first place. Oliver smiled sadly. I guess I made enough memories for both of us. I looked at him. No. You noticed enough for both of us. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared out at the backyard. I don't know what happens now. His voice was almost a whisper. The memories are disappearing. The fake ones. I can feel them slipping away. He took a slow breath. And when they're gone, he finally looked at me. I don't know if you'll still be here. I reached over without thinking. This time, I was the one who took his hand. He looked down at our hands in surprise, then back at me. I wasn't there because your memories told me to be. I squeezed his hand gently. I was there because somewhere along the way, I forgot to notice that you had become the most important person in my everyday life. His eyes filled with tears. Nathan, I smiled. I think we both spent 2 years being afraid of different things. He waited. You were afraid telling me how you felt would ruin our friendship. I laughed quietly, and I was so used to having you beside me that I never stopped to ask myself what my life would look like without you. The silence that followed felt different from every silence we'd shared before. It wasn't uncertain anymore, it was full of possibilities. Oliver looked at our joined hands, then very carefully he asked, "So," his voice shook, "now that we're finally remembering the same life, can I ask you something I never had the courage to ask before?" I looked at him, at the man who had spent months believing we shared a life that had never happened, at the same man who, before the accident, had quietly fallen in love with me and convinced himself it was better to stay silent than risk losing our friendship. And somehow, those two versions of Oliver had become one again, not because every memory had returned, but because the truth had finally caught up with the feelings. I smiled. "You don't have to ask." He laughed nervously. "I kind of do. You've waited long enough." He looked down, shaking his head with a small, disbelieving smile. "I had this whole speech planned once." "When?" "I don't remember the exact day anymore," he shrugged. "I just remember standing in my kitchen practicing. I couldn't help laughing." "You practiced?" "For like 3 weeks." "Seriously?" I'd say it out loud. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then I'd convince myself it sounded stupid. I'd change one sentence. Then I'd decide you probably didn't feel the same way. So I'd throw the speech away. He smiled. Then I'd write another one. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. "You really are an overthinker." "I know." "And now?" He took a slow breath. "Now I don't have a speech." He looked straight into my eyes. "I only have one question." I nodded. "I'm listening." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Would you like to go on a date with me?" "Not." "Will you still love me?" "Not." "Can we get our relationship back?" "Just a date, a real first date, one that belonged to both of us." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. "I'd love to." For a second he didn't move. I don't think he expected me to answer so quickly. "So," I laughed. "Was that a yes?" He blinked. "Wait. You said yes?" "I did." "You actually said yes." "I know." He covered his face with both hands and laughed. "I can't believe that worked." "You literally asked me out." "I know." And somehow I was more nervous than after waking up convinced we were dating. Emily cried. Not dramatically, just enough to pretend she had something in her eye. When Oliver told her the next morning, she hugged both of us so tightly that Oliver complained about his ribs. "They're still healing." "They're healed enough." She refused to let go. "I've waited months for this." I looked at her. "You mean since the accident?" She smiled. "No." She wiped at her eyes. "I mean since before the accident." Oliver groaned. "You knew?" She laughed. "I knew you were hopeless." Then she looked at me. "And I knew you were oblivious." "I've accepted that." "You should." Our first date wasn't fancy. It wasn't candlelight, or expensive, or planned weeks in advance. We walked to the little Italian restaurant 15 minutes from our neighborhood, the one we'd somehow never visited. Oliver looked around after we sat down. "This feels weird." "Why?" "We've eaten together dozens of times." "I know, but this is different." "It is." The waiter walked over. He smiled. "Together?" Oliver looked at me. Instead of assuming, instead of relying on memories, he waited. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Yeah, we're together." His smile was brighter than I'd ever seen it. Dating Oliver felt surprisingly natural, not because we'd secretly been dating all along, we hadn't, but because we'd already learned all the little things people usually discover months into a relationship. He knew I couldn't function before coffee. I knew he hummed while cooking. He knew I always forgot where I left my keys. I knew he couldn't watch sad movies without pretending he had allergies. He remembered to buy my favorite cereal. I remembered to replace the batteries in his smoke detector because he'd forget every single time. None of those things came from false memories. They came from 2 years of quietly showing up for each other. About 6 months later, Oliver's neurologist discharged him from regular follow up appointments. His recovery was remarkable. Most of the false memories had faded. The cabin, the lake, the imaginary apartment, the invented vacations, gone. Sometimes he'd remember pieces and laugh. I still kind of miss that fake cabin. I don't. It had a great view. It never existed. You can't prove that. I rolled my eyes. You've become impossible. You've always liked impossible. He wasn't wrong. One Saturday morning, nearly a year after the accident, we sat on our familiar back porches with coffee. The gate between our yards still stood open. It almost always did now. Oliver looked toward it. You know what? I think that gate explains everything. I frowned. How? It was never closed. I laughed. What does that mean? He smiled. We kept making it easier to walk into each other's lives. I looked at the worn path between our houses. The grass still hadn't grown back. Years of footsteps had left a permanent trail. I guess we did. He reached over and laced his fingers through mine. No. He smiled softly. You just took a little longer to notice. A few weeks later, I was cleaning out a drawer when I found Oliver's letter again. This time, I didn't put it back. Instead, I carried it across the yard. He looked up from watering his plants. What's that? I handed him the folded paper. He read it silently. By the time he reached the end, he laughed under his breath. I was so dramatic. You were honest. I was terrified. I know. He folded it carefully. I almost threw this away. I'm glad you didn't. He looked at me. So am I. I reached into my pocket. I actually have something for you. What is it? I handed him a plain white envelope. His name was written across the front. He smiled. You wrote me a letter? I figured it was only fair. He opened it. Inside was a single page. It read, Oliver, you once wrote that you'd rather stay my friend forever than lose me because you were selfish. The truth is, you were never selfish. I was just slow. Thank you for knocking on my door. Thank you for making coffee. Thank you for fixing sinks, carrying furniture, feeding my cat, remembering birthdays, checking if I'd eaten, and quietly becoming the person I depended on before I even realized it. You thought your accident made me fall in love with you. It didn't. It made me finally pay attention. I don't need the life your memory invented. I love the real one we built without either of us noticing. And I'd like to keep building it. Nathan Oliver didn't speak. He folded the letter. Then he wrapped his arms around me. We stood there for a long time. No dramatic speeches, no audience, just the two of us. Eventually he laughed into my shoulder. You know, what? Our real story is better than the fake one. I smiled. It took us a while to get there. It did. But at least this one. He leaned back just enough to look at me. We'll both remember. And for the first time since the accident, we finally started the same love story together.